Ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to start. We appreciate the fact that the plenary session hasn't maybe fully finished, but otherwise we will run out of time and there is another session after this, believe it or not. So first of all, a warm welcome to everybody. We really appreciate you taking your time to be here. We know that a lot of the crowd has already left, but this is a very important subject that we're going to be talking about. And in fact, having heard other panels, it's also a little bit a question that has remained in the air about re-victimization and so forth. So this panel is called Safe Reporting and Sex for Grades, How Do We Prevent Re-Victimizing the Victims? My name is Jennifer Sarvery-Bradford. I work at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. There I have the global lead for exploring how to address the gender dimensions of corruption. I also wear another hat, which is coordinating our work in Africa. I've worked at the UN for about 26 years in various capacities and at a number of duty stations around the world. But today, we're really going to focus in, and I'm not going to waste any more time on myself. We're going to dig and dive straight in. The question is, when we talk about sex for grades, when we talk about reporting mechanisms that are gender sensitive in order not to re-victimize those who have the courage to come forward and report corruption, where do we start? Today, we'll start with data, scientifically sound and representative surveys. And we have with us Mr. David Rossis, who is a statistician at UNODC Research and Trend Analysis Branch. He oversees the implementation of the UN surveys of crime trends, operations of criminal justice systems, and he is also involved in the methodological development on crime statistics, contributes to UNODC's research on crime, and notably on the achievement of SDG 16 and its targets. So, welcome, David. In 2017, UNODC and UNDP launched a consultative process with stakeholders from a wide cross-section, which in 2018 resulted in the Manual on Corruption Surveys. And the overall goal was to support states with the methodology to measure corruption and report on progress made towards achieving SDG 16, Target 5, sustainably reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms. David, the evidence base which data these surveys produces is what should really be the foundation of all public policies. And to quote Sylvie Duré, who is the head of the Swiss Federal Office for Gender Equality, those that are invisible in data are also invisible in policies. Since then, not only has the methodology been implemented, but can we maybe even say that it has been further refined and more inclusive? And can you please present to us a couple of examples on how this has been achieved? Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today for this panel. So can I have the slides, please? So as Jennifer was saying, a methodology has been developed to conduct a population survey on corruption, mostly bribery, the experience of bribery, as well as other forms of corruption like nepotism or vote buying. And that methodology has been used in a number of countries, including in Nigeria in 2019 and more recently in 2023, although the report with the data is not out yet, and in Ghana. And throughout the surveys, we've done some modification to monitor or measure other forms of corruption. So I'll just present a few findings from these surveys, starting with the Nigeria. So here on this table, we have data on the prevalence of bribery by sex in Nigeria in 2019 and also 2016 for women and men. And we can see it's much higher for males than female. So there are some reasons for that. One of them is the type of public officials women are dealing with. So they tend to have contacts with, and sorry, I should have gone back a bit. Also, when I say prevalence of bribery, I should add that what we're looking at here is out of people who had at least one contact with a public official over the last 12 months, what is the percentage who either paid a bribe or was asked to pay a bribe but refused at least once? So it means 35% of men and 4% of women had that experience of bribery. So I go back. So in terms of contact, women tend to have contact with public officials with whom the risk or the likelihood of bribery is lower, like teachers or medical personnel, whereas men have a lot of contacts with police officers with whom the likelihood of bribe request is a bit higher. That being said, if we look at the prevalence of bribery by public officials between male and female, it's systematically a bit lower for female than for males. Thinking about the reporting of bribery, which is obviously extremely important, it's very low. So in Nigeria, in 2019, it was less than 4% of bribery that was reported. It's a bit different for the more recent data, but this is the one we have that is published. For the reasons for that, both men and women have mentioned that it's just regular business, so there's no need of reporting it, or nobody would care. But also, I think roughly 9% of the respondents said that they didn't know to whom to report bribery, and that percentage was a bit higher for women than for men. Now, taking the other side and looking at the public officials. So, in general, the likelihood that a public official, a male public official, will request for a bribe is much higher for men than for women. It can be 5 times higher, for example, for male police officers than female police officers. However, when the share of, or the percentage of women in that profession is higher, like in teachers, where there's more of an equal share of men and women, the difference is lower, and also the likelihood that a male public official will request for a bribe is lower. So that was for Nigeria. In Nigeria in 2019, there was a test and a question on how to measure sexual corruption on the request for sexual favor. And then that question was implemented in Ghana in 2021. So I'm just going to present now on Ghana. So that question was whether in the last 12 months, the respondent, or it happened that a teacher, master lecturer, professor, health worker, or other public official may have made the respondent feel like the respondent needed to provide a sexual favor in order, for example, to get a job, get a promotion, pass an exam, or get any other type of public service, as well as whether that has been requested but the person refused. And the result was that 2.6% of women who had a contact with a public official had been, over the last year, requested a sexual favor, but also 1.1% for male. So it didn't affect only women. However, you have to understand that it's pretty on the lower, the lower percentage, because in the same survey, respondents were also asked whether they would disclose a case of request for sexual favor to a friend or family, and 50% said they wouldn't disclose it, so we can assume that it's probably a bit higher. So I think I'm going to stop here and pass the floor to the next person.
Thank you, David. And I think, you know, one of the really interesting things here is, if you look at that statistic, some of the comments when we've spoken about this in other fora is that, well, it's only 1.1%. But that 1.1% represents human beings. Let's not forget that. It also shows very clearly that this happens not just to women, but women and men. So thank you very much for that. So now we'll move on. Lilian, you are the co-organizer of this important session. Lilian is an attorney at law and retired as the head of the Technical Unit on Governance and Anti-Corruption Reforms, TUGAR, a Government of Nigeria institution, with a mandate to provide coordinated data through empirical research and facilitate interagency coordination. And Lilian, as head of TUGAR, you led the process of corruption risk assessments in Nigeria and carried out significant work in anti-corruption research and programming. You are also a member of the International Council of Transparency International, and you've coordinated moderated workshops in the past of IACC in gender corruption. Lilian is here to represent our absent friends. As some of you know, it's been challenging at times to get visas in time and so forth. But Lilian, I'd like you to please represent Ezinwa Okorafor, who has provided some examples of the situation in Nigeria on reporting this type of corruption, sexual corruption. Please, Lilian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jennifer, and good evening to everybody. This evening, I shall be speaking on behalf of Ezinwa Okorafor, who is the International Director of FIDA, as well as Laura Nyirikidi, who is the Regional Vice President of FIDA and resides in Uganda. FIDA is an association of women lawyers with country chapters all over Africa, Asia, South America. In Nigeria in particular, FIDA has branches in all the states of the Federation and provides, in addition to their other activities, volunteer advocacy services for vulnerable women. So they are in a position to get reports on issues of gender discrimination, including sexual harassment or sexual extortion, or as Jennifer would call it, sexual corruption, in real time. So they keep a documentation of these incidents. I'm going to just give flashpoints of snapshots of what Ezinwa has documented and what the stories they have documented in Nigeria. She starts by saying that several cases of this nature go unreported. And the reason is that the victims are afraid of re-victimization if they report a lecturer in school, a professor in school. Even if the professor is sanctioned, which is rare, his colleagues will continue victimizing the person who reported. So the tendency is for them to keep quiet. One example is the University of Calabar. In August 2023, some students of the Faculty of Law of the university staged a protest outside the office of the Vice Chancellor of the institution against their dean, the head of the Department of Law, Professor Cyril Ndifo. They were alleging that he has been sexually harassing female students over a period of time. And the protest they staged went viral on social media. So both the university and the government were forced to act. My colleague from ICPC will give a little more detail when he's talking. The university suspended this lecturer for alleged violation of the provisions of the extant laws and policies of the institution. At the moment, he has been arraigned in court and is undergoing trial. I must point out that this particular case came to the fore due to a posting by a female victim, a victim of this lecturer who had left the school. She was unable to report at the time she was in school. But when she left, she posted something on social media, which then went viral, and the other students were then encouraged to act. This particular student, over a year after leaving the university, graduating from the university, did not go back for her certificate because she was afraid she would still encounter this abuser in the system. Now, in the University of Nigeria, in April 2024, the management of the university indefinitely suspended one Mfonobong Udodum, a lecturer in the General Studies unit of the university, who attempted to extort a female student who was married. This student planned with her husband, and they sort of arranged a setup, and the lecturer was caught in the act in a state of undress. So they were able to capture it on camera, and it went viral. This particular student had offered the lecturer money when he made sexual demands, but the lecturer refused. In the University of Ife, another lecturer was jailed due to a female student recorded their conversation where he was demanding sex from her. a master's student, threatening that she won't be able to graduate unless she complies. This female student recorded it, and then it went viral, and this lecturer was tried and jailed. This is one of the successful prosecutions that has been recorded. In Ebonyi State University, another university, a final year student named Favor Uguka is reported to have committed suicide due to the harassment. A lecturer kept on failing her. She would pass all the other courses except that of the lecturer. In frustration, she had repeated a year, and still the lecturer failed her after she had passed all the other courses. In frustration, she killed herself. So this report, her case is being promoted by her fellow students who were aware of the incident. And in a viral video by one of the students, she talked about how the mental health issue arising from sexual exploitation within the university system and the other health challenges that the students face. With all the publicity and the involvement of the anti-corruption agencies, the universities claim that they have anti-sexual harassment policies. There are 272 universities in Nigeria. There are 149 of them are private universities, and a search of how public the sexual harassment policies has been done by FIDA, and they could only find online like 30 of such policies with no evidence of how they are being implemented. And and how obvious these policies are, whether the students are aware of it and everything. So I think I'll stop here now, yeah, and then maybe talk about the other recommendations they are making, and also the case of Uganda, which I'll talk about subsequently.
Thank you, Lillian. I feel like these are testimonials almost, hearing you talk. And again, 1.1%, but there are human beings, and we hear them here, and we hear almost their words when you have spoken to us now. Thank you for that. But we also have here Jimo Suleiman.
You're welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You work with the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offenses, or the ICPC of Kenya.
Nigeria.
I beg your pardon, Nigeria. You're the deputy director, and you head a project, the Projects Tracking Division. And ICPC is a government agency saddled with responsibility of combating corruption in Nigeria. Jimo, you've worked in various capacities as certified risk assessor, public education, prevention division, as well as in enforcement division. And in Nigeria, at the ICPC, you've taken the sexual harassment policy and anti-corruption legislation to task by implementing it to its fullest, including successfully investigating and prosecuting sexual corruption cases. So in 2022, the ICPC created the Sexual Harassment and Abuse Response Team, or SHART. This specialized team is tasked with the responsibility of handling sexual corruption cases as an intervention to reduce abuse of office or power. And as we heard from Lillian, these testimonials were from students at state universities, and by being employed by the states, they are effectively, these professors are public officials. So could you please tell us more about the Sexual Harassment and Abuse Project in Nigeria?
Thank you for having me. You could see how endemic the situation was as narrated by Madam Lillian. It was because of this endemic situation that made ICPC to say, okay, let us have a look at what is happening in our tertiary institutions. Initially, what we do is to combat corruption generally, but we now have specific look at what is happening in our universities with regard to sexual harassment. So the ICPC constituted a committee, a panel, to look into that. First of all, what we did was that, okay, let us train our officials, our staff, our officials who will definitely interact with either the abusers or the victim. So they were trained, they were given a set of skills such that they will be able to say, okay, this is what is happening and this is what is not happening. the team, we call them Sexual Harassment and Abuse Response Team. And they are specialized in, they have responsibility of handling sexual harassment cases as an intervention to reduce abuse of power in the system. And our act, that's the law setting up the ICPC Act, also criminalizes whatever happened with regard to an official, a staff, a lecturer, corruptly asking or receiving or obtaining benefit, because we term it as a benefit for himself or for his friends or whatever. And there's a sanction that that we have a provision for sanction, which is 7 years. With regards to what happened to, what we did in the University of Obafemi Awolowo University, a professor. This was the first time in Nigerian history that a professor or somebody will be prosecuted and will be jailed by the court. So this now enlightened everybody, every institution now know, every student now know that, okay, if a professor in certain universities can be taken to task, can be jailed, definitely they can come up and say whatever that has been happening to them. I think this, what we have done really has encouraged students or victims to come out and say, yes, this is happening to me, and whatever has happened, when we see such, we move in and we take cognizance of it, and we take responsibility, we take them to court. So that is what has been happening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please.
Then again, because of the policies we have adopted, each universities are now trying as much as possible to bring out policies. But we have seen that these policies are just there. They are not being operated. But we are working on that.
Thank you so much. Yes, so the work has only started.
Yeah.
Really, right?
Yeah, yes.
And it started at a higher level than directly within the universities.
Yes.
But before we move on to discuss that a bit more in detail, I'd like to return to Lilian and ask you, please, once again, to represent our absent friends by giving some examples from Uganda that have been provided by Laura Nyarikindi. Lilian, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Laura is the Vice President for Africa of FIDA, who also is documenting these things in her environment. She has sent in a paper. She says, in March 2018, the University of Makerere set up a committee to investigate cases of sexual harassment. And they looked at the policy in existence, and they tried to review it and update it. In the investigation that followed, one theme that featured strongly was abuse of power. And they noticed they were able to find this abuse of power not only in the academic section of the university, but even in the registries, collation of results, different departments within the university. Even in terms of retrieval of results, there were allegations of demands for sexual gratification before students can access their records or their results and everything. The committee recommended policy and administrative reviews, and also expedited investigations of complaints, and even provided for counseling services and rehabilitation of survivors of sexual harassment. Also in 2020, the Inspectorate of Government in Uganda also issued a report that revealed a high incidence of sextortion or sexual extortion in the university system, especially in sex for grades. In a survey that was conducted, 10% of respondents reported incidents of demand for sexual gratification in the preceding 5 years. The problem here is that the regulations dealing with sexual harassment are framed squarely in the context of employer-employee relationship. So within the university system, it talks about sexual harassment within the workspace and has no clear accommodation for the student body. So that is what has been wrong with this the situation in Uganda. Despite the efforts they are making to address the issue, there is still insufficient protection for the student body, because the policy in existence talks about employer-employee relations, and the students do not fall into that category.
Thank you, Lillian, once again for representing our absent friends. So what have we heard? We've heard that the data is there. This exists. We've heard the testimonials, as if we didn't believe the data. We hear that there are policies which we are trying to implement across the world, and in particular here in Nigeria, to address this. Yet we hear that there are problems in the reporting area. It's underreported, I would even say highly underreported, and possibly also not only due to lack of knowledge of how to report, lack of understanding that this is actually a form of corruption, but also, not to be forgotten, elements such as social stigma and having to grapple with cultural norms, biases, and expectations. So on that, I would like to turn to José Perron, who is from an organization called TIMBY. That's an abbreviation for This Is My Backyard. José has a background spanning over 15 years of managing culturally diverse projects in the nonprofit, education, and tech sectors. She's currently working as a project manager at TIMBY and supports organizations across South America, Africa, and Asia with the design and implementation of the TIMBY tools. She facilitates the onboarding of new groups, customizing their systems based on specific needs, and organizing comprehensive training sessions and workshops. So TIMBY, now you're asking yourself, what is this TIMBY? Yeah? It's an organization that offers a suite of encrypted tools used by communities, NGOs, workers, brands, and other groups to document and share monitoring data related to transparency, accountability, and human and environmental rights. But guess what? This has also been implemented in the educational sector. But, José, I will leave it there. Don't want to steal it, but I wanted to sort of excite people because I find this a very interesting tool for anonymous reporting. José, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, corruption is brought to public consciousness when it's too late, when forests are cleared and human rights abuses have been committed. Unless there's more engagement, more oversight, and more transparency, the situation won't change. You've named already a few reasons why people aren't reporting or reporting isn't common, but one of the other issues is disconnection. We can see this graph on the screen here. On the left, we have those on the ground, community members, citizens, in these cases, students at universities. And on the right, we have those who can help create change, governments, law enforcement, journalists, NGOs. And in the middle, we have the reasons, the blockages that are caused by this disconnection. In this case, often security threats, poor infrastructure to share details about the issues, lack of systems for remedy and resolution. In the instances of sexual corruption, blockages are often caused by systems for reporting on issues can be inaccessible, especially if there's lack of digital literacy or literacy. The systems in place, if any, are not encrypted or anonymous, resulting in fear of retribution. And people don't know who to go to report to for issues. And so we have the TIMBY tools, which we can see here on the screen. So the TIMBY tools provide a two-way communication so that the information can flow between these two groups of people. On the left, we can see the reporting tools. We see the TIMBY app right at the front there. The TIMBY app allows for easy reporting, which can include time, date, and location stamped media, and users can report anonymously using the app. We also have a WhatsApp and Viber integration to make reporting even more accessible. All reports are funneled into a centralized private dashboard. Information here can be triaged, managed, and shared for resolution with internal or external stakeholders. On the dashboard, you can also view reports in map view to better understand tendencies and hotspots for better decision-making, and also generate analytics. Finally, we have a content creation tool that allows you to easily create reports, press releases, or blogs that include reports or information that has been collected. Our tools are easy to use, built to meet people where they're at, with icons and color, as you can see in the image, so that even those who have limited knowledge or comfort with technology can feel at ease using the application. The app is encrypted, anonymous, and has panic and emergency features. The dashboard has mechanisms to track and ensure remedy or resolution. And the systems are customized to be adapted based on the needs of each group we work with. So to give you an example of what a system might look like, I'll talk about a group we've worked with in Nigeria who works in sexual corruption in universities. So this is a nonprofit organization who talks about sexual corruptions within a few different universities throughout Nigeria. Students report cases using the TIMBY app anonymously. This information or these reports are filtered into the dashboard, which we can see a report there in the middle. On the dashboard, SysLAC helps to work as a dashboard moderator, and they triage reports. They work with both mental health professionals and pro bono lawyers so that they can triage these reports to these respective different groups. So depending on the report, what is explained in the report, they might go to one or another of these groups. The system also allows a back and forth communication between dashboard moderators and those who are submitting reports, so that if ever it's not clear the type of remedy or resolution that they'd like, there's a possibility to communicate with people, even if they submitted the report anonymously. So evidence-based reporting changes the question of whether something happened to what to do about it. In addition, the perception of being monitored often reduces low-level corruption, creating more accountable systems. We call this the spotlight effect. So as you've already mentioned, TIMBY already works in over 26 languages in over 50 countries. We work with NGOs, communities, youth groups, indigenous groups, governments, brands with projects, often including various levels of stakeholders. We work on projects varying from environmental corruption, supply chain transparency, child labor and human trafficking, and most importantly to this panel today, we work with groups to create safe reporting systems related to sexual corruption.
Thank you so much, Jose. This is really important to talk about the reporting. I mean, that's, after all, the focus of this session, right? How to avoid re-victimizing the victims when they do choose to report. Social stigma is one aspect, but research has shown that women take into greater consideration when deciding on whether to report, if to report, things like the confidentiality of the system, about fear of retaliation. We heard the testimonial earlier today about a young student who took her life. But there is also this fear of re-victimization. So let's now say that we have, despite all of this, we have people who are courageous enough to report. I will turn to you now to talk a little bit about the protection that is required. I mean, Huguette really doesn't need a lot of introduction. Huguette Labelle has served as a period of 19 years as Deputy Minister of different Canadian government departments. You're a former Chancellor of the University of Ottawa, former Chair of Transparency International, former board member of the UN Global Compact. You know, it goes on and on and on, and that's like 10% of the CV that you can find actually on this app that we have here today. But you... I would like to call on you to draw on your expertise and your extensive knowledge in this area. We've spoken about the reporting element. We've heard about the identification of the issues and so on and so forth. But then, how do we ensure a protection mechanism along the same lines? Over to you, Huguette.
Thank you very much. Yes. It's supposed to work? It is? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Chair and colleagues, and all of you for being here this afternoon. I know there are many other things that you could be doing instead of being in this room enjoying the sun outside and so on. I think that what we're dealing with here is one of the worst corruption issues, primarily because the perpetrators have power, and those who are being abused do not. Whether it's primary, secondary school, university, or at work. This is the main issue. And the perpetrator, if you're dealing, let's say, for a secondary school, the perpetrator has friends that are teachers. They are the neighbors. They are, family sometimes. And therefore, once it becomes known to that person, the perpetrator, that the victim has reported in, especially if there's only one victim. And that can be the case. If there are multiple victims, then it might be a bit more difficult for the perpetrator to know who it is. But basically, when there is one, he knows, or she knows perhaps even. And this is dangerous for that student. First of all, the student, can be put in a very difficult situation. Her reputation can be damaged by that person so that, he can protect himself against anything that could happen, and on we can go. So basically, getting to your point of safe reporting, Jennifer, here, it's not just the question of destroying the victims, it's also the fact that victims do not report if they don't feel safe in reporting, obviously, as we've heard today. So the students in a school or university or at work need to know that there is a reporting system, that it is totally confidential, and that it will not go further or much further without they knowing what is happening and agreeing to a certain extent to it. And basically, if a student, for example, in secondary school, if her case of being a victim, of having been raped, becomes known, what can happen to her, depending on if her family feels shame, she can be killed. Or she can commit suicide, being concerned about what happens to her family and to herself. But more often than not, it's her future, because she will drop out of school or he will drop out of school and therefore not have the kind of education that is needed. Now, so basically, in developing a safe reporting system, it will vary. And it can start sometimes at the level of where the student is, at the school level or the university level, or it can be a national, and eventually, hopefully, it becomes national or state in terms of having the kinds of policy, the kinds of regulations that exist to make it easier when this case goes to court, if it does, eventually. And so, but at the, so each institution, either a special reporting individual or center, has to be identified, put into place with students or employees know that it exists, that it is sufficiently private. I know I established an ombudsman service when I was president of Canadian FIDA, and basically I made sure that they had a separate information system than the rest of the system, that the place where they were located was not in a way that everybody knew if they saw somebody go into that office, something is happening here to that person. So that, there are a number of things that are very basic in a way that needs to happen. But so having the place, having the location, having the individual who is a highly professional person, knowing what their job is and how important protecting the information is at that stage. So the second stage is really the most difficult one, which is the investigation. The first one of protecting, having a safe reporting system has to happen. It has to be done, otherwise nothing works. But it's when the investigation starts that it becomes very difficult, because for example, if it's a teacher, is that teacher put with or without pay has to leave, their employment temporarily or for good? And when that happens, of course, everything becomes known, And so the investigative aspect has to be done in also a very careful way, and with close collaboration with that student or with that person who is the victim. Because otherwise we can put them in a very dangerous situation. And thirdly, of course, if it goes to court, then by that time a whole lot of things have already happened. So safe reporting, very careful investigation done by people that know how to do that while protecting the victims. Because even if the victim is said to be anonymous, if there's only one victim, the perpetrator knows who it is. So that part, is vital. So I'll stop here, Jennifer, because there are so many more interesting persons in this that can say more.
It's a large panel, and it's Friday afternoon, but I'm all the more grateful for everybody who's turned up here today. I wanted to add, Huguette, if I may, that it's important also to have several reporting options, in the sense that you don't want to have just the one person who happens to actually be the perpetrator who you're trying to report on, be the person you have to report to really give options.
Jennifer, I have two things that I forgot to mention.
Oh, well then, go ahead.
How's that? I think that the contract for for all professors in a university or for teachers have to be very clear. That if something, that they have to act with integrity, and that if that student, protection is vital, and that they're not there to satisfy their sexual interests. You may not say that in this way, but so the contract, but also the principal's contract, the principal or the president of the university, that it has to be very clear with them as well that what their responsibility is in relation to this. And if there is an outside institution that has been appointed to deal with this, sometimes this is much better than within the institution, that this principal is able to work, or this president is able to work very well with those institutions that have been set up. But, to me, that is part of the whole thing. And there's much more, of course, to it as well.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And I think you were talking about the investigation and so on. What we know in general from whistleblower cases is that it is important that the person who's done the report is kept informed throughout of what is actually happening to their case. Because otherwise, out of fear that nothing is happening, out of fright, they may themselves start looking into what is actually happening and divulge the investigation, and therefore, ruin the confidentiality themselves. All of this to say, there's a lot at stake. And you made reference to this, that it's also the future that is at stake. If we look at women and men, the pandemic has already been hard hit in many ways for women's rights and women's advancement and empowerment. And this is where I would like to turn to Arwa Hassan. Welcome, Arwa.
Thank you.
Arwa is a communication specialist at the German Development Corporation, GIZ. You have international developments. You're an international development specialist with more than 20 years spent focusing on the Middle East, North Africa region, working closely with civil society, private sector governments. You were with Transparency International for 18 years, building strategic partnerships in the MENA region, and regularly lectured and presented at international fora and various universities on issues of combating corruption, governance, institutional reform. And I would like to now focus on the topic where you would like to talk, which is that on the 1st of March 2023, Germany adopted a feminist development policy. And it's interesting that it comes at this stage, post-pandemic, where we have seen hard-won gains in gender equality erode very rapidly, from women's right to decide over physical autonomy, to even questioning the concept that has been around for 40 years, namely gender equality, gender mainstreaming. So where are we going? What can we do to reinforce our efforts to include a gender dimension in the prevention and fight against corruption? Arwa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon to you all. Very pleased to be here with you. We've heard a lot of very detailed examples about the specific problematic that we've been talking about this afternoon. I'm going to take more of a sort of macro view, a kind of bird's eye view, really, and just to also say that the comments and observations I will share this afternoon are my personal observations as a practitioner in the international development field, and these are not I'm not necessarily representing, these are not the official views of the GIZ or of the German ministry. Yes, so feminist development policy, I'd just like to quote a global movement for more justice and about making full use of the potential of all people. So this was the definition on the website of the Federal Ministry. And the questions that I would like to put into the room are, I mean, these are very strong claims here that we are making, we in the development community. So this is a global movement for justice. I'm sure nobody would disagree that we see ourselves as part of a global movement for justice. But the questions I would like to ask are, how effective are we in the international development community being at this? And how can we measure this effectivity? Because I feel the bar is raised quite high. And who may we perhaps be alienating by such terminology? I would posture that when we talk about feminist development policy or feminist foreign policy, and there are other European governments also using this language, it's not just the German government, in essence, are we not talking about a more inclusive, participatory development policy? Is that not what we are talking about when we are talking about feminist development policy? We're not talking about promoting women to the disadvantage, to the exclusion of men or in deprived communities. Surely we're talking about a more participatory, inclusive approach that needs to ensure that no one is left behind, to use the language of the SDGs. So these are the questions I would like to put into the room, and I would like to make a few more points. By 2025, more than 90% of the newly committed project funds of the Development Ministry, of the German Development Ministry, are scheduled to be earmarked for projects that advance gender equality. And I think with this line of thinking, feminist development policy is seen as a dictate of common sense, to quote. Women are strong, women have innovative ideas, women have knowledge. No society can afford not to use this potential if it wants to progress. If women have equal rights and equal responsibility, then there is less poverty, less hunger, more stability in the world. This means that it pays off to strengthen women's and girls' resources and representation. And I'm sure that nobody would argue with that. I think in terms of moving forward, really looking at how are we going to be talking about development policy in the coming 5 years, in the coming 10 years, my plea would be really to be very mindful of the language that we are using in trying to advance some of our development aims. And if we look at some of the most deprived communities in the world, some of the poorest countries in the world, who also happen to be some of the countries that fare very badly on the Corruption Perceptions Index, Afghanistan, Yemen, and others, these are also deeply, deeply conservative societies, where often the promotion of feminist development policies can be totally misunderstood. I think the dialogue element here is incredibly important, to enter into a dialogue with those local practitioners and decision makers that are on the other end of implementing what we understand as development policy. So these are the issues I would just like to put into the room. I will stop there. I feel I've raised a lot of questions. Maybe I'll stop there, and I look forward to the discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arwa. And I think, this is important. We speak often about a whole of society approach to fighting corruption. But in fact, if we look at the whole of society, it's also a global society. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption now has 190 parties, 189 states, and the European Union. This is truly a global movement in the sense that we're near universal adherence. We are all concerned, all governments, and both public and private sector. So thank you very much for that, those thoughts that you shared with us. I am now going to actually turn to the audience and ask if there are any questions. Yes, I see already from the back, and one from over here. So let's start there. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and then we go back to the panel. 4. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, please.
Hello, good evening. My name is Priscilla OBGM. I'm a PhD student at the Montfort University, Leicester, with interest in illicit financial flow. My question really is for Mr. Jimo and of the ICPC. So you mentioned that you come in when you hear cases of corruption, sextortion from students. But my question is there any proactive measure, for example, an app or website or link known to students of all universities in Nigeria where they can safely report? And is there such a link? Is there knowledge of support that is available to the students should they avail themselves of this opportunity, if there is?
Thank you. Now we go here, number 2, please. Sorry, I'm going to make you run. Okay. But please, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
My name is Gregory. I work for TI Russia. So when I started my career at TI chapter, I used to work in the Advocacy and Legal Assistance Center. So I worked with the victims of corruption. And there is always a question when a person writes to you, provides some information, and then he or she says that I have changed my mind. I don't want you to do anything about that. Or when I encountered some cases, including sexualized violence, that the person say, I don't want to do anything about that. And so it's really a big question sometimes. I mean, this panel was mostly about the victims reporting these cases. But what about situations when you are aware of this case and you don't know if you should get a person, like agree if you should report or not? So my question is not like a moral one in this case, but I want to ask it more from a perspective of effectiveness. Should you think there should be a clear opportunity and encouragement for third persons to report about cases of such sexualized violence, or should it be more like focused only if a victim agrees with that? So that's my question.
Thank you. Third question here. I love this. We're going to have 2 women and 2 men. It's fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Very much. My name is Chido Onuma. I'm from Nigeria. I coordinate a whistleblowing project in Nigeria. My question goes to the gentleman from ICPC. Anonymous reporting is key. A few years ago, we did some surveys supported by MacArthur Foundation around whistleblowing. And one of the reasons that people claimed almost about 95% was that because there was no enabling law that would guarantee their safety when they report. Just wondering if this is something that has caught the attention of the ICPs in terms of a whistleblower protection law, because there is no better incentive for people to report or blow the whistle than knowing that they are anonymous, but if and when they do get into trouble, that they ultimately would get protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have the last question here.
There's actually a hand up.
No, we're gonna. I'm sorry. We're gonna stop at 4 questions, and we'll do a round of answers. Otherwise, it's too much, and we'll lose track. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the very wonderful discussion. My name is Claudia. I work at the Basel Institute on Governance. So I have 2 questions. One is I would like to hear more from the panel about stigma, because I think that this is a hugely important part of the issue, because it's, the victims are re-victimized by society, right? And so what do we do about that? Because I think that if my 2 cents, my instinct is that we need to recognize this problem publicly and make it a discussion, so that if it's out in the open, and other people identify and other people understand that it is not the victim's fault, then, it's like an added layer for them to be protected if they, go ahead and denounce. So I wanted to ask, how should we speak about this publicly in a way that is constructive and doesn't backfire? Because I can very much imagine situations where we say, okay, let's speak about this is a problem, and it has a horrible backlash. So that's the first question. And the second question is for Huguette, because I love your idea of including something in the contracts of university professors. And I was just wondering if you have any examples. What is the language that one could use to this effect? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to stop right there and go back to the panel, because otherwise we're going to lose track, because we have lots of very diverse and very interesting questions. So, first of all, Mr. Jimo, you got 2 questions there.
Yeah. Yes, I have two questions here. One from Mrs. Priscilla. Yeah, she was talking about free reporting and support for the victims. What ICPC does essentially is, now that we have set up a sexual harassment response team, we are using this team to get in touch with most of the universities to help them, first of all, in articulating their policies against sexual harassment policy. That is one. And again, the team, having been supported by the commission itself, as they move on, to show people or to show victims what they can do with regards to maybe giving them ICPC website to report to. We ask them to report anonymously. When they report, we quickly take it on, and we prosecute whoever we feel that has infracted on the law. Again, Mr. Chidi was talking about whistleblowing. Yes, ICPC Act itself gives a little bit of protection to whistleblowers. I think Section 65 and Section 27, subsection 2. Give a little bit of protection to whistleblower. However, ICPC was part of those who are driving whistleblowing policy in Nigeria as far back as 2015. So I think we are doing something in that regard.
Do you feel that the protection that is available is sufficient?
It's not sufficient, I can say. The protection is not sufficient. However, from our own perspective, if we are if there's a case and it is reported to us, or even if it's not reported to us, if we get into the case, we try as much as possible to protect the victim. We let the university know that this is our case. If anything untoward happens to this victim, everybody involved will be taken in. So at least we let them know that, okay, this is a government issue now. You cannot victimize the victim any longer because it has been taken to court. So I think we do that.
Thank you. I know that Lillian is burning to add
talk
here.
on stigma, just to say, actually, FIDA had addressed the issue of stigma and as a challenge to reporting cases of this nature. There's the issue of unbearable publicity. Victims are hounded on social media. You'll be surprised that you would think that since this is a moral issue, that the victims will get the necessary support, but you always have for and against. So those victims are usually hounded. And the young girls are blamed that how did you attract the attention of lecturers? Good girls do not attract such attention. Mm-hmm. You hear such. Yeah. Then there's also the issue of pressure on the families of the victims to withdraw the case. I know a lady who is a university lecturer herself, when her daughter was being victimized, the response she did was to she teaches in a different university, was to call up her friends in the particular university to appeal to the lecturer to leave her daughter alone, instead of confronting the issue head on. So this is the kind, because she doesn't want to tarnish the reputation of her daughter, because people will ask, good girls do not attract such negative attention. Now, then there's also the issue of responses of certain persons in authority. We had a weird case that happened in Nigeria recently. ICPC is on the case, where it is alleged that a minister actually tried to intervene. Perhaps Mr. Jimo should talk about that. Even the lawyer to the accused person had to be now charged for obstruction of justice because they tried to interfere with the witnesses. So these are the challenges and stigmatization that follows reporting of these cases. And one other critical issue, you guys touched a bit on it. When the case actually goes to trial, how will these victims stand up to the pressure? We are talking about girls in their late teens, early 20s. I mean, some of these cases are graphic. They will have to sit in court. They will have to, tell stories that they don't want to relive. So how will they stand the pressure? That is why part of the recommendation by FIDA is that could it be possible to have a sort of trial? Can the hearing be held with limited publicity? That's what they are saying. And the names of those such victims shielded from the public glare. This happens in terrorism trial cases, so why can't we push for it to happen in these cases? Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. And in fact, this is what happens often in other corruption cases where the identity is being obscured from the accuser, right? So I think it's not a far stretch of the mind to think that this should also be available for such cases. And what you're saying about the stigma and the victimization by media and so on, perhaps we are waiting too long before having this dialogue that, Claudia, that you were talking about, We tend to react when there's a big media splash. Sex for grade scandal, oh, this university, and so on. We can't wait. It costs lives to wait in this case. And I wanted to then go back to our colleague here and our participant from TI Russia. Victims changing their minds. Should we encourage third-party reporting? Well, I just want to field the question here to the panel. Is there any particular ideas or views?
Maybe I could say something about
Please,
that.
go ahead, Ara.
Yeah, I think this phenomenon happens because people don't have faith and trust in the system that they will be sufficiently protected, that there will be no repercussions for them, and it will also not backfire on their families because often revenge is taken on families, other family members, in various communities. And I think really, I mean, we've started already touching on some of these solutions and recommendations. There needs to be definitely not just the system strengthened, but I know, for example, that in Germany, what they have for cases of sexual harassment or sexual violence is they actually have opportunities in court for the victim to give evidence in a closed space away from the main courtroom. So the hearing is ongoing, but the victim gives her evidence somewhere else in a closed room, just one-to-one, and it's videoed, but she's spared the embarrassment of having to give evidence in the courtroom. So that is actually a very good, option. And also, there are many countries where there are NGOs that actually, like in Germany, there's the, I think it's called something like the White Circle, who actually support and accompany victims through the whole process of a trial. They literally pick you up from home, accompany you, visit you before the court hearing, and accompany you through the whole trial. And I think that makes a big difference if you have someone literally sitting there holding your hand from start to finish as to whether people will report or not. So, yeah.
Yeah, we have had 2 cases where it was CSOs that reported on behalf of the victims, I think in Ogun State. It was one CSO that reported that this was happening, and we took up the case. So the victim doesn't need to come to court regularly to see graphic issues that are being taken. So CSOs can join and help do something in this regard.
Thank you. Yes, and Huguette, please.
I think that, these are very, very good points. Also, once this becomes visible, then I think the parents have to be brought in if we're dealing with, a primary or secondary school student, because they can create more problems than less, in the sense that they may become very aggressive and publicly, doing a variety of things and creating problems that would not be helpful for the investigation or for the court case if it goes to court. One thing that I might add here is prevention, to go back to a point that you made. And one of the things that I have seen at times is in a primary, but especially in a secondary school, at the beginning of the school year, where the counselor would have a session with all students, a class at a time, not 1,000 in a room, but each class, and to tell them what it is that they should not tolerate, what it is that they can do, who they can, if they're worried, if they're concerned, or if a teacher is becoming extremely friendly and touchy and maybe not rape yet, but what can they do? Who can they speak with? And so that they know that it is highly confidential, that they can speak to someone. So to do that, not just when they enter the school and that's it for the time they're going to be in school, but at the beginning of every year or every semester. I think it's one way. The other one is bringing in training and retraining of teachers, special programs for teachers. And maybe a third one is faculties of education in universities who prepare teachers to see how they can build into their training program this issue and recognize and help them recognize the damage that they can do and what they should be doing to themselves, not be perpetrators of this. It doesn't answer completely your point because it's a very important one, but these are some of the things that might work.
Thank you. Yes, I think there are no complete answers, and that's why we're also having this session, because we need to come together to think collectively about what we can do. I think the psychosocial support element that you're talking about, Huguette, is tremendously important, and this is one of the features in the TIMBY app, right, where you can link a reporting person to a psychologist, to medical healthcare, whatever is required at that stage. That can also be added to the app, right? Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, systems are designed based on who it might be most beneficial to link into the system, all the while keeping reports safe and anonymous and not be completely accessible to anyone and everyone. So really deciding who it might be best to have on the end line of receiving reports, who might be able to help with resolution or remedy of issues that are brought up, and then be shared really particularly individually based on who will be able to help with that. So really customizing based on those elements.
Exactly, because there's no one size fits all. We've heard that in several of the panels across the IACC. And also, of course, knowing your rights means that you also know when they've been violated, right? I will open up for a couple of more questions. There was somebody else. Who was it? We have a couple of questions back here.
All right, thank you very much. I think it's very useful that we're having this conversation, drawing attention to gender and corruption. I'm particularly excited that UNODC has presented data. One of the things that I was at the last meeting by UNODC and the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, where they presented findings of the latest gender and corruption report, even though it's not yet in the open. And part of the conversation was to ensure adequate disaggregation. Even when you say males and females, experience corruption this way, there are other parameters, within the construct that you call female, we have females with disability. They experience corruption quite differently from the rest of the females. We've heard several stories. There was a story of a certain female who was visually impaired, who was raped and went to the law enforcement agents to report. And she was being questioned as to how she was able to identify the perpetrator. So there are all of those issues. I'm just suggesting that in the gender and corruption work that UNODC does, which is very interesting, I think we need to probably bring on board other parameters for disaggregation. This is also in line with the SDG's recommendation from the Office of the Official Statistics to ensure that we disaggregate more so that we are very clear how people are affected by corruption. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, behind, I think.
Hi. My question is about the language that we use and how language can be helpful or unhelpful in ensuring adequate reporting. And I have the experience of going with someone to the police to report sexual harassment, and it was shocking what I witnessed there. I live in Malta, and some of the laws there are very vintage. The language used is outdated, and it's not how people speak. So, for example, they use definitions like participation in sexual acts with a minor, which is not very far away from people's language. And the police officer who was taking this report shouted across the room, "Hey, what do you call this? That's not rape, but you know the other one," and asking her colleagues for help with these definitions, because they're not really human language; they're legalese. And I wonder what tools in your work have you come up with how to collect this kind of factual information to help the victim to define what happened to them, what kind of acts were committed, and how they can be expressed in human language, and then translated into the legalese if needed for litigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my question is a follow-up question to the comment that you just made and the need to bring other parameters to the equation. I'm wondering how is it possible to do that, if it is possible, using surveys? And it's a question to David.
Excellent. Because that's exactly what I was going to ask.
Using surveys.
So, do we have any more? Let's go back to the panel, because I think these can raise several different dimensions depending on who chooses to answer. But I will turn to David first of all. Obviously, disaggregation and different categories and groups of people and so forth. Could you please shed some light on what UNODC is doing in this respect?
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, as the participant was saying, so. And that's something that was introduced in Ghana, but I think other countries are doing it, but at least with our support introduced in Ghana. So we've asked a question in the survey for people to report on their disability status, so asking what is their experience. There's a standard set of questions to be introduced in surveys that are used in all sorts of surveys, not only the ones on corruption or victimization surveys that UNODC is doing. So in the report, you will have more information on that. I think you've probably seen it at the workshop. So, but definitely for us, it's a direction we try to have. I know in some countries in Latin America, there are also questions on gender identification. That's also quite important, especially when you deal with sexual violence. So all this we try to integrate. And then there are some questions also on the sample size of your surveys, because if you're dealing with very small population, it's also, you need to have a sample size that is quite large. But it's a direction we try to take and be more inclusive also.
But the level of disaggregation is multiple, right?
Yeah.
So we do disaggregation not just by sex, right? But we also do people with disability and level of income,
I mean,
and so on. Not just to explain to the audience who might not be survey experts, as you are.
There's a lot. I mean, on education, age group and sex, marital status. So there's really a lot. And yes, sorry. There's a lot that in Nigeria already collected it. So, but that often requires a bit more analysis than what you have in the main report when you present key findings.
Exactly. No, because then it goes to show, in the Ghana report, for instance, where I was involved, we could look at, for instance, level of education and size of bribes. We could look at people with disability vis-a-vis, their prevalence and contact with public officials. Actually, it turned out in Ghana that people with disabilities were just as targeted for bribes as people who are fully able-bodied, if you wish. And so on. So there is a lot of disaggregation that is possible, and by standardizing the surveys, of course, we get that data to disaggregate by. Now, question of language, what definitions do we use? I'm opening up to the panel. He gets his wow. But Mr. Jimmo, as ICPC, language, it is, of course, in order to not re-victimize, you need to have special language and special training.
Like I said, when the response team is being brought about, there were certain skills they taught them with regard to how to talk to people, what language should be spoken. And we have a basic item that I can reel out here, that first of all, when you are talking about sexual harassment, there are certain things that should be looked out for, either from the victim or from the perpetrator. The physical violence, including sexual assault, brushing body or object against another, demeaning comments on workers' appearance, age and private life, sexual comments, stories and jokes, sexual advances, insults based on gender of the person, repeated and unwanted social invitations, sending sexual explicit messages, unwelcome physical contact, including patting, pinching, stroking, kissing, hugging, whistling, fondling, or inappropriate touching, physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature, and considering paternalistic remarks. These are the things that were trained, that our response team were trained on. These are the things that they should look into. And again, when they are going into the University of Polytechnics to teach students, these are the things that the students should look out for.
Thank you. And if I may, I will add to that, just generally for whistleblowers, what we say at UNODC and sort of international standards is that we cannot assume that the person reporting knows what constitutes corruption and what does not. And I think that also goes to sexual corruption, yes, sexual harassment, and so on. We cannot assume that the person reporting will know whether this fits the box that has to be checked in order for it to go forward. Yes. So I think that your training is vital. I'll take a little chance to make a little. You see here at the front are these cards. It's a QR code at the back. It's UNODC's report called "The Time Is Now: Addressing the Gender Dimensions of Corruption," where we speak a little bit about this, and also say that we've taken a page from the very sad book of gender-based violence and how to interview potential victims and to have a victim-centered approach so that they feel safe to be able to report. So the cards are here for you to take, but I will return to the panel. Does anybody else want to talk about? Yes. Lilian?
I want to make a comment on terminologies and language. I recall when the UNODC concluded I think it was second corruption survey, which they launched in 2015, and the charts showed that men pay more bribes than women without going further. The women there spoke up and said, what kind of bribery are you talking about? And what currency are you talking about? He then opened up a discussion about body currency corruption, and that was how this issue of paying bribery with sex came about. They went back to the data. The challenge they had at that time is that people refused to respond to such questions, even when they were included. But in the subsequent survey, I think it was reframed, and then the responses were more forthcoming. So that's the point I wanted to make. If you just use the term bribe, you're not going to get the appropriate results. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have to wrap up here. I would like to ask everybody 30 seconds, a little soundbite for what you would like people in the audience and us all to take away from this session. Yvette, I will start with you. Soundbite.
Well, to me, the prime thing is that sex for grades or sex issues are a major problem and much bigger than we think, because for every case reported, it'd be interesting to see how many are not ever reported. and the victims might be truly victimized for the rest of their life. So, hopefully one can find ways of better ensuring that those who are the victims do come out and get help, get assistance, and get the issue fixed, in their community.
Thank you. Jimo.
Okay, my take is that within the university system itself, the administrative panel they set up is not usually helpful. Victims do not believe in them. Victims do not have confidence in such administrative panel. So I believe that whatever has happened is a criminal offense. It should be treated as criminal offense. Thank you.
Thank you. José.
I always say that I think that technology isn't the solution, but I think that technology should be involved as part of the solution. And I think creating safe reporting channels for information to flow is really important in this context.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, well, I would add that from the few surveys where we had a question on requests for sexual favors, what we saw is that it's not only an issue affecting women, but also men are also victims, and that's something to think about.
Yeah. Lillian?
Yes,
well, you get a minute then, because you have to respond for 3 people.
No. Okay, what is happening in tertiary institutions, not just in Nigeria, but across different countries, is an epidemic. And we should foster an enabling environment for people to speak up, because this has the capacity of affecting education and access to justice rights of young women and also men, and ultimately impacting on the achievement of the SDGs. So we need to encourage reporting, get it out in the open so that it can be addressed appropriately.
Thank you, Lillian. Arwa.
Thank you. Yes, I think that the language we use to think about things is actually quite critical. The nomenclature that we use in our development policy is just as important as the content behind it. So that would be my point, really, that moving into the future, I think we need to be very mindful that not only are our policies inclusive, but the language that we use to communicate about how we want to implement development policy also resonates with the communities that we want to help.
Thank you. And I will end with my own favorite topic, that we are all biased, but are we aware of our biases? Because women and men can both be victims, but also perpetrators.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and that's our time up.